So, I had this thought in the back of my mind, and maybe this is my first sort of negative video about Resident Evil Requiem where I disagree with the creator's statements, but just hold on a minute, I will explain everything. First and foremost, there was a Capcom event that was detailed where they talked about the game, and I have all of those keynotes on my channel where they went over the graphics, the detail, how some of the third person and the first person camera would work out to your benefit, how mostly third person cameras are focused for action horror and how first person really brings out the horror suspense. And I liked the stuff they were talking about, but when they got to the section where they openly and specifically called out why Leon isn't really in the game due to a lack of horror elements with superhero like characters, I have to illustrate that this statement is perceived in two ways. So when they said this, it said Leon wouldn't get scared of a bucket or anything like that. I personally believe that is bullshit in terms of the situations they can create. We have Resident Evil. Now, I know Leon would not get scared of a bucket falling over, and he would be prepared for most situations or heavily armed or just put into that equation. But you have to realize that Resident Evil is a franchise known for evolving viruses, right? And I understand that RE6 is an action game. I understand that game is 100% you go around and you can do a basketball jump with Leon 5 feet in the air and impale Simmons in the head. So they want to go with a more horror aesthetic, slow paced, you get scared, which is why they made Grace Ashcroft. But the problem that stems from this statement is, once again, you can create oppressive fear for any of the legacy characters. And what I mean by oppressive is just swamps and swarms of numbers coming at people, newer mutations, which I assume is going to be part of what is at the derelict section of Raccoon City, where there's still life evolving within that. When we go back to Raccoon City, it's no way that we're not going to be greeted to some other monstrosity that has evolved by viruses. That's the main reason you're going back there to some degree, so why not have a legacy character show up in Raccoon City? The second thing is, I think Capcom is just trolling us. They're pulling our leg. There's no way that Grace is going to be the only protagonist in the game. I saw people say, I'm worried that if they introduce a legacy character within Resident Evil Requiem, is going to overshadow Grace's story. And we have prime proof and evidence that despite Resident Evil having multiple characters, where is the overshadowing? Like, I put out a layout of the entire mainline timeline. In the first Resident Evil title, there was no character overshadowing because you had Chris and Jill having their own separate and individual campaigns. In Resident Evil 2, it was the same thing. You had Leon and Claire having their own individual campaigns and A and B scenarios to accommodate them. In Resident Evil 3, you had Jill and she had her solo singular campaign with sections interspersed where you might play as Carlos for a little bit and that's it. Resident Evil 4, you play as Leon throughout the whole fucking thing, and you play as Ashley for the smallest chunk of gameplay in that game. Resident Evil 5 is an intertwined campaign with Chris and Sheva. They have the same goal or lead to the same goal, whereas the overshadowing of the characters. In Resident Evil Code Veronica, you had Chris Redfield and Claire Redfield, and you understood their connection and their story, and you played with them for a significant chunk of time between both of them. Claire was the beginning of the game and Chris was the end of the game. Then you had Resident Evil 6, you had literally 4 protagonists: Leon, Chris, Jake, and obviously Ada, and they had their own unique story and unique premises throughout. You had Resident Evil 7, that was mostly Ethan. You played with Mia for one section on the boat, that was it. And then Resident Evil Village, you played as mostly Ethan and a small chunk with Chris at the end. In the last 2 RE games, there was no character overshadowing with Ethan Winters, a brand new character. And even though a legacy character showed up, which was Chris Redfield in Village, he did not overtake Ethan's story. Was he a part of events within the story? Was there situations and scenarios where Chris showed up? Yes, there were, but Chris was not the focal point of Village. What I'm saying is that Capcom has done this before, where they create a new character, you see their story throughout, and then you may see a legacy character interspersed into the plot itself, somewhat similar to Village, where you saw Chris at the end, he was doing shit, you play as him, and the story continues from there, but it's mostly still an Ethan Winters story. I don't understand why these newfound Grace Ashcroft fans are saying she's going to be overshadowed. If anything, I believe that you can perfectly put in a legacy character in this game, no problem. And I think if they don't put a legacy character in this game, it's going to be a fundamental failure. The term Requiem means it's a eulogy for not only the living, but they say it's also for the dead. It's like Requiem for the living, no, Requiem for the dead, Nightmare for the living, or whatever the fuck that phrase is. I don't know which way it goes. I know it's in Capcom's like official description, but I do know that it not only involves the people that came from Raccoon City, but the folks that are centered around it, the folks that died from it. This is obviously going to be their biggest story beat when you go from the hospital to Raccoon City to anywhere else. I think it's going to jump in locations, obviously. You need to have a legacy character in this game, and I know there are going to be people that say no, it needs to be Grace 100%. If you put them there, she's going to be overshadowed. You can make a great story with a new character and have returning supporting characters come back into the fray. And I'm going to be honest, when it comes to Raccoon City, what this city relates to the most in terms of the characters is not Grace Ashcroft. I'm very sorry about this. I'm very sorry to say this. Like, you can like her, no problem. I'm not saying she's bad, but she's an offspring of a legacy character, right? Which is Alyssa. All of the Outbreak characters have more important relevance. Those people that were around during that time and escaped, they have more important relevance to Raccoon City itself than the daughter of someone who basically was, you know, an offspring, and the main person was in the Raccoon City incident. Like, her mom has more important lore because she was actually fucking there, right? You see what I'm saying? I'm sure they're gonna find a way to workshop this in. This is their job. This is the anticipation of the game itself. But I have no idea why there is so much division and ire and almost animosity, because there are fans of Resident Evil who want legacy characters to come back and be introduced in some way and give their own takes and opinions on what happened with Raccoon City, and maybe show up and help in certain moments, because it seems like, once again, these are Geoff Keighley's words, not mine. He talked about ambition and scale of the project. He said that this was going to be bigger than the eye can see. You kind of need some legacy character to come back and sort of have some exposition in the Raccoon City segment. And I think, once again, it's a fundamental failure if they don't have that in this game. I think it's a wasted opportunity. I think it's a fundamental failure. I think it will be something that harms the story, in my personal opinion, more often than lifting it up. I do want to see Grace ascend to a very likable and cool character. That's what Ethan Winters did in Resident Evil Village, where he broke his shell and I started to like Ethan. I want her to have that same similar premise and story arc, but I don't want the legacy character sacrificed in one of the biggest like sort of hits of nostalgia we're ever going to get with going back to Raccoon City. I said this before, it should have multiple meanings, and it seems like the title does, where the going back to the past and reliving the fear, that should be reliving the fear for Grace and her mother being killed and trying to crack this case and find out what's going on there. That's one aspect. Also the player going back to old haunts and seeing what is going down and seeing some new activity go on in Raccoon City. And the last piece of fear is a returning character from the series that everyone knows and loves. They're going back to that old haunts as well, and they are reliving the nightmare, and you could bring some particular story elements in there. At the end of the day, no matter if we agree or disagree, this is personally what I feel, this is my personal opinion, you gotta have somebody close to it. It could be Jill, it could be Leon, it could be Claire, it could be the Outbreak characters, like the old Outbreak characters that are still kicking, because obviously Alyssa is no longer with us. And of course they should be involved in the story, because if you don't have the old Outbreak characters, like what is their opinion since one of their people, you know, one of the survivors that was with that group has fallen? I think it's fair to not only ask questions but give feedback to Capcom and say, hey, what the fan base really wants is this reunion with some of the living that's still around. They might be a lot older, significantly older, but they should be present and available in this game because of their ties to Alessa, and that tie shouldn't just be only Grace. And I'm not saying that I condone the idea of the extremist side, the extremist Leon fanboy side who wants to go to Capcom and put a bomb in their building if Leon doesn't show up. I don't condone that behavior whatsoever. At the same time, he should be there. He should be there. Some Raccoon City survivors should be there, because I think that strengthens the story way more often than not, and it would bring a lot of things full circle, whether these people live or die. I think that is the really interesting part if they do introduce older characters, because they're not getting any younger. The clarification is that this game takes place in 2028. This is well into the future. This is well into the future. They said it's 30 years after the Raccoon City incident. Leon is 51 years old. If there's a concern about making them into larger than life action heroes, superstars, roundhouse kicks, why don't you take a page from Metal Gear Solid 4's playbook and introduce the fact that these people are not at their prime peak athleticism? Like, years upon years has passed, and I know people might say, well, Barry came in and Barry was bodying everything or whatever, and Barry was like at a certain condition where he wasn't sick and he was killing BOWs. But I mean, yeah, you could put in illnesses and maybe years upon years, because remember, Leon has been in years upon years upon years of BOW warfare. Like, Barry went in to save his daughter. Chris and Leon are always on the front lines, like 24/7. All right. Therefore, it is plausible to say maybe in one of their operations they got hurt, or they are really feeling the effects of going through countless missions all of the fucking time. And you could create a story where they might have something going on, or they might be like, oh, my senses are not as good as it used to be, or maybe somebody loses an eye in the future. We don't know, but that could add some interesting dynamics to the game. And I mentioned Metal Gear Solid 4 because that's the game that said, okay, we're gonna put a kibosh on the story of Solid Snake. What do? The cells inside of him are accelerating. He's dying. He's getting old. This is it. Like, this feels like a finality, so to speak. And I think if they went that route with the story, it would be interesting. You gotta do something to spice it up with the legacy characters. If you want to strip away the plot armor, you can write it in a very creative way that makes sense to their history, and then do it, execute it, and then the fans will be actually shocked by this and they want to learn more, see more, and uncover the story, as opposed to saying not at all, we're just going to focus on one person and that's it. I just feel like that's a creative failure. Personally, that's a creative failure. And you know, you did things that are weird at this point that are valid criticisms in my personal opinion. With Village, you still have the idea that we have leftover plot scenarios that are still unresolved in Resident Evil. Chris and Jill have a rogue BSAA sect coming after them. Maybe that could be resolved in RE10 or alluded to in this game and set up for the next game. And then you also have the fact that once again, every time, Capcom in their infinite wisdom, dude, what is happening with that immortality virus that you introduced in Resident Evil 5? Where's Alex Wesker that you had her story set up, and now her brain is inside the mind of a child and she is living in the Burton home in Revelations 2? I'm hearing rumors that Capcom does not want to do the Revelations games anymore, yet you have lingering plot threads from both of those games and characters that will never be resolved from both of those games, Jessica and Raymond. And it's like, what did they do with the virus they captured and put on the black market? Oh, nothing else. We have an immortality virus floating out there. Nothing else to be explored on for now, for the time being. It's why I want to believe the Spencer theory, because there's no way that they introduced this element of him running across Mother Miranda and not have that mean something, or not have her show him or teach him something that was played as a trump card. There's no way. There's no fucking way. I do think that immortality virus will be back on the table eventually. If not, that's another abandoned plot thread. I'm going, what the fuck? Wouldn't a villain want to get their hands on that as soon as possible? ASAP. The idea that you have a virus and you cannot basically die from normal and conventional means and infected means, that'd be crazy for a storyline, but we don't even have that yet. What the fuck? And they set up the building blocks and the foundation for that. I don't see why they don't capitalize and just say, hey, we're gonna go whole hog, and hopefully they do with this game, and let's explore these elements that we didn't really explore before. I hope that is on the table. If not, if you leave too many lingering plot threads closed, that's also going to be a fundamental mess and a disaster. Where is those stories building up? Where are they building up? What are they building up to? That's the main question. What happened to all this other stuff? Where's characters that haven't appeared for years? Carlos, all these other people. I mean, he was thick in the Raccoon City incident as a, you know, he survived that too. Again, I really want them to cover these lesser stories and make some type of intertwined branch. And they even said it themselves. In this particular plot, there's like a lot going on with the Raccoon City incident, and we're uncovering new events within this game. That's going to be a massive undertaking. The lore is getting really big. I understand it's confusing to keep up with, but you have to make these titles interesting with the legacy characters, and you have to use them in an effective way. Just because Leon doesn't get scared of a bucket falling over doesn't mean you can't use oppressive horror. You can't pin this man down with new mutations and everything. We have the C virus. We have all these fucking viruses now that can shapeshift people into grasshoppers and crazy shit and everything, and you can't make some creative mutagen that these legacy characters never encountered that could possibly try to harm them or hurt them, and their skills are essentially diminishing because they're getting older and older and older, or their bodies are getting more worn. what I want them to do is just make this fascinating, put a fascinating situation where a person is actually going through some shit and you can create a tense action horror behind it. I don't want to hear the excuse that Capcom can't go half and half, because they're doing this whole recommended thing where you play as first person with Grace, and that's the recommended camera angle, even though you could switch. And then there's third person, which they said, hey, third person is really good for action segments. I believe Capcom is pulling our legs. They are trolling the ever-living fuck out of us. They've done it before. They've done it a lot with Village, where we thought that Chris was going to be the main antagonist when he shot Mia, and then it turns out that, oh, well, that's actually Mother Miranda, the real antagonist, and I was just trying to save you, Ethan. I was just trying to go in and kill Miranda and get out, right? So not only do they have to go unorthodox with this game, but there's obviously a bar of expectations. They want people to talk. That's part of the social media push, keeping it close to the chest and being as mysterious as possible. And I do think a legacy character will show 100%. I would bet my fucking left ball sack that a legacy character has to show or be referenced in some capacity within the story, and that Raccoon City segment is what we know the least about. I think that's going to be the grand closer of the game, and in order to do that, that's when things are going to start to tie in more and more and more, and you're going to go, oh shit, they're really going this route or that route. They want to keep it shrouded in mystery, which I understand. I don't want to be spoiled to the game either. But when Tokyo Game Show rolls around, they're gonna unpeel a layer, and we're gonna be talking. We're gonna be making like fucking thousands of videos on theories and shit like that, and that's exactly what they want people to do. Remember that dummy finger shit from Resident Evil 7 and them hyping it up and trying to say it has more significance than ever when that demo came out, and it was just literally a nothing burger. It's the same premise here. They wanted Leon as a protagonist, and the wording is very specific. He doesn't work for horror elements, but who's to say he can't work for action, and that you can make the last stretch of the game more action horror oriented with overwhelming enemies. It's just a no-brainer. So like I said, that's just my thoughts on this whole ordeal, this whole matter. Really, we're just being fucking teased to death, and there has to be some update on the legacy character sooner or later. You don't even have to show the whole story, just show one of them, and that's all. And if they don't do that, and it's just, you know, one person throughout the whole game, like, I'm not going to shit on Grace at all. I think she is fine for what she is. It's cool to get some new blood, but we also need new blood and old blood, and I can't believe I am saying this, but when it came to new blood and old blood, I think that RE6 did it well. RE6 and RE5, I'm sorry people, because you had a legacy character with RE5, and then you had Chris, the legacy character, then you had Sheva, the new character, and they both had an intertwined story. With RE6, you had multiple campaigns. You could choose between legacy characters and new characters, pairing up with those legacy characters. It was done, you know, in terms of that, at least, it was done well. There was no complaints. There was no overshadowing. It was perfect that way. And if this is not a 2-campaign deal where you're playing as a new character for the beginning, and that's the scary horror shit, and then you're playing with the legacy person at the end of the game that has reminiscent ties to Raccoon City, it's a fundamental failure. That's what I think. So that's my long-winded kind of rant done. I'm sure veterans are gonna understand where I'm coming from, but the main people that I see having a contention with this premise is the constant insertion of characters like Chris or Leon, and maybe they have fatigue of those characters. Maybe they do want to see new characters, or they do want to see legacy characters that are fairly underutilized. And I get that premise wholeheartedly. I have two minds about this ultimately at the end of the day, which is why I'm rationalizing this and trying to squeeze this into the recording. But you have to understand two things. Number one is that brand recognition comes with the Resident Evil license. Not only will Resident Evil sell on premises of quality alone and being an RE game, but also the fact that you do have those recognizable people come into the fray, which is why legacy people are important. And this could invite the opportunity of introducing more legacy people, because we did not hear about Outbreak people for the longest time, unless you count that little file that you saw in RE7, which is not a real official appearance of Alyssa Ashcroft in the flesh, but it's a reference to her nonetheless, just building to this bigger story now in Requiem. I'm glad that Outbreak is being represented, and it should be represented more, is what I'm also agreeing with. But there is staying power in characters with Chris and Leon, and they are indeed on the forefront of the battle lines all of the time, so it makes sense for them to appear a lot in the mainline story, because they are the main troopers fighting this virus along with many other people. I don't think it's wise to exclude them, especially in this situation. I believe when they showed Raccoon City, it was done. You gotta have one of them in there, one of those Raccoon City survivors, whether you like it or not. Now, could you say, hey, maybe Chris and Jill could skip this game? Sure, even though I would be disappointed, because I feel they basically grandstanded Jill after that movie and they're not doing anything with her. Yet this popularity is important for this game in particular. I know it's gonna sell buckets, boatloads, millions upon millions. Even the Ethan Winters games, where he was a new character, they sold a lot of money. But the crux of the story, the brand recognition, the identity, what is familiar to all Resident Evil fans, mostly the older ones, seeing these older people, it does matter with legacy. And honestly, this should be a no-brainer. I'm probably saying it like 5 times over, but it should be a no-brainer that the game itself is touting itself as a legacy title with the very surroundings of where you're gonna go to, which is the Raccoon City ruins. Right? So not having the characters there makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, considering what they showed us. But like I said before, Capcom are just, they are the masters of fucking around. And I don't know, I guess I just hope the spoilers don't show too much when they do at Tokyo Game Show, because there's that limit where you want to show enough to the player, but you want to stop yourself, because if this is a game with multiple surprises, ambition, and scale, it needs to be a lot kept under wraps. I don't want to know which character dies, I don't want to know which character lives at the end of the game, just enough to say, hey, this is a bit of a dire situation, but I want to know more. The perfect hint of marketing was when Resident Evil 5 showed that goddamn gravestone of Jill Valentine, and everybody lost their minds. They didn't know what was going on. They were in a collective frenzy. If they can manage to pull off something similar of that magnitude again with the next trailer for Tokyo Game Show, I think the internet will lose their minds just enough, and the marketing push would be like super crazy. That's what I want. Even if they, I don't know if they can do it twice. They can't do it twice. They can't say, oh, we're gonna show Leon's gravestone, or we're gonna show a gravestone of said character or whatever. I don't know if that could work twice, but something of that magnitude that they can tease, and maybe there isn't like a full death confirmed, but you just see some dire situation in the trailer, it will make people go, oh shit, what's going on? I can't believe it. Are they actually gonna kill this person, that person? Maybe not. Just keep us on our toes is what I'm asking for, and that might just be enough, and it'll lead to people going into the game crazily. But I guess I had a conversation about this yesterday in my podcast. Speculation is inevitable about Resident Evil, and I asked, do people consider speculation to be spoilers? I understand wanting to go to the game clean. The only thing I can say is that if you want to go into a game clean these days, being on social media is very, very, very challenging and difficult, because there's going to be somebody that will tell you, hey, this trailer came out. There's going to be somebody that will have speculation with you, even if it's not true. And I don't know if I said this before, but I like to give a sincere fuck you to Dusk Golem. I think Dusk Golem is some of the worst sort of misinformation that has come from the Resident Evil community. This man said last year, you can go to Project Wesker's channel, where he says this leaker has been exposed. Just type in leaker. He's talking about Dusk Golem. And Dusk Golem said that Requiem was gonna come out this year. On record. It's a screen cap of it in that video. Leaker exposed Dusk Golem. Just type up leaker. It should pop up. I'm gonna put the video in the description just in case. He said Requiem was coming out this year. Dusk Golem also has a tweet where he admitted he is full of shit and he likes to spread misinformation and all this type of bullshit. People just taking this guy as gospel, it's awful. It's just a legion of idiots, like, constantly believing this guy. And I'm sick of it. I'm sick and tired of it. I'm sick of engaging in the Dusk Golem discussions. I believe if people just unplugged from these rumors and leaks, as my dogs go crazy, I apologize about that. If people just unplugged from all of this stuff and know that most of it coming from him is probably a 50-50 shot, it will be either true or false, and it's leaning to false in a lot of situations, just unplug from this guy, because it's not making any of this speculation any better. Lastly, I don't want to hear if legacy characters can't be vulnerable. If you have other media like Marvel, for example, where Spider-Man is vulnerable all of the fucking time, whether he's Peter Parker or Spider-Man, and Spider-Man can be hurt, Spider-Man can be damaged, Spider-Man can be emotionally and physically affected, and this man is in certain pieces of media where you look at Spider-Man PS4 and Spider-Man 2, he's a veteran at that point, and he's still getting his ass kicked by overwhelming odds in Spider-Man PS4. I don't want to hear that you can't do it for RE. If they don't do it, then they are lazy. That's what I feel, because you can make legacy characters, trained characters, veterans vulnerable. And that's my opinion on that. I will see you guys next time. I hope you have a great day. Be good people. Take care of yourselves. Later.